Are you a self-taught drummer? If so, that's great, and there is no shame in that. Many of the drumming greats were self-taught, and so you're in good company. However, I've noticed in a lot of my students, those who have been self-taught for a long time and are just getting into lessons, noticed a lot of mistakes or flawed philosophies, you could say, that are really easy to fall into as a drummer learning on your own. So I share these today, not to come down on you for being self-taught, that's totally fine. I was self-taught for years. But rather, I want to shed some light here and share some tips with you, some strategies for staying out of these ruts that are easy to fall into. That way you're continually making progress and you're doing the right things and you're practicing, because I always want you making progress. And ultimately, what's cool is that these are things that really every one of us can relate to, especially self-taught drummers, but even those of us who have been taking lessons, we can definitely learn something from this too. So let's dig in. Hey, while you're here, grab my free gift to you, my free e-guide, Know What to Practice, the 3-part daily practice routine that helps you condense into 30 minutes a day the most essential things that you need to be working on to make sure you're making progress day after day. Even if you're a drummer with a busy life, most of us are busy, and so it's hard to make sure we're focusing our practicing. That's what this does. It gives you confidence in the fact that you are focusing your practicing and making sure you're hitting all the key areas that really deliver results in your playing. That's huge. This helps you with hand technique, this helps you build coordination, and even play more musically. There's a lot of good stuff in this guide. It's been so helpful to so many drummers. It's the most popular guide here on the channel. So definitely check that out. It might even be your companion to today's lesson, because it's gonna help you get out of ruts and help make sure you're on track, especially as a self-taught drummer. So be sure to check that out before you go. All right, on to today's lesson. Now, it's safe to say that if you're a fan of this drum channel or any other drum channel out there, educational resource, then you're not truly self-taught in the truest sense of that phrase. But really, any self-taught drummer throughout the history of the drum set has learned from someone. It just means that you're learning indirectly. Being a self-taught drummer really means that you don't have one-on-one lessons with a teacher who's actively critiquing you and keeping you accountable. And so it's your job, it's your part to go out there and seek the resources and to monitor your progress. I found from surveying you guys that about half of you identify as self-taught, half of you say you've taken at least a handful of lessons in your life. And so I know that I'm speaking to a pretty big chunk of you guys who would identify as self-taught and say, yeah, I've been learning by listening to records, I've played with bands maybe, or I'm starting out and I'm learning on YouTube. Either way, that's great. And even if you aren't self-taught, I hope you'll still learn something today, because we're talking about some points that honestly should help everybody. So here's mistake number one, and this is the most common one I see. Self-taught drummers tend to physically work harder than they need to when they play, because they're missing some key hand techniques that would actually save them a lot of energy, save them a lot of effort. And this is a very common symptom of, I know symptom makes it sound like this is a terrible sickness. And again, like I said, I'm not trying to come down on people who are self-taught. I want to help you here. I went through this when I was playing on my own for 2 years before taking lessons. I wasn't exactly gripping my sticks the way I needed to and wasn't doing my technique any favors. When I started lessons, that cleared up a lot of that. What tends to happen when you're self-taught, you're looking at all these drummers, you're watching them play, and you're listening to them play. And a lot of times you're developing your musical mind really well, and you're even building coordination. And you're maybe sounding pretty great, and you've got great musical ideas, and you're playing with a band. A lot of great self-taught drummers are super musical. But sometimes the one thing that gets neglected is the hand technique, because it's just one of those little details that it's hard to really work hand technique when you don't have somebody sitting there telling you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. It takes a lot of self-discipline and a lot of self-analysis and self-critique to get right. So that's something that's often missed. So what I want to encourage you to do today is to critique yourself and really evaluate your grip. Video it up close in slow motion. If you have a smartphone, make slow-mo video of your hands, of your grip. I've got a whole bunch of videos on grip here on the channel. There's a whole playlist of stuff about grip, hand technique, loose rebound, and how that helps us with playing singles, doubles, fluidity around the kit, speed, fingers, all that stuff. It all starts with gripping well, gripping right. And so if that's you, if you feel like this is something you've potentially missed and it's a weak area, what's cool is that when you start digging into this, when you start solving your hands and getting them doing what they're supposed to, everything else across the board in your playing gets easier. And you find that maybe you've been playing for decades, and suddenly that speed wall you were once crashing into is gone. Suddenly you're keeping time more easily. Suddenly your feel improves. Suddenly you're more relaxed. You just feel more at home at the kit. So many of those things stem from getting the grip right. And so it's possible you've played all your life without really getting this right. And if that's you, spend some time doing it. It's very worth it. Make sure you've got the stick loosely bouncing. You're forming that fulcrum point. I like to do middle finger here. Middle finger fulcrum here, and then you've got the other fingers just loosely curled around, and the fingers extend when the stick bounces. That way you're not having to move your wrist a lot. You have a lot of stick movement within your hand. This is something I talk about a lot here on the channel because it's so important. So I'll link videos in the description to go more in depth with that. That's probably the biggest mistake I see from self-taught drummers, but it's very fixable. You've got the resources right here. I just want to make sure that you're going down the right path and you're focusing on the right things here so that you're totally avoiding this mistake. That's the goal. I want you to avoid this and make sure you've got your hands squared away. Mistake number 2, kind of related to number 1 for sure, but unknowingly allowing weaknesses to proliferate. I like the word proliferate because it makes me think of like bacteria growing. Bacteria proliferating, and weaknesses and bad habits can easily proliferate and just grow like bacteria in our playing if we're not aware of them. And there were so many things that I was doing poorly in my playing early on that I was just unaware of. And once I was made aware, it was like, oh, wait a second. Awareness is step number 1. You've got to be aware of the problem going on if you're going to solve it. And so when you don't have a teacher critiquing you one-on-one, I know this makes this a lot harder. So you have to be your own teacher. You have to take what I'm showing you, what I'm teaching you, and stow that away and practice in front of a mirror. Film yourself practicing. This is the way to work your grip, but also the way to, in general, improve your playing. If you're recording yourself, even if it's just from your phone, record yourself playing songs, playing grooves. Go back and listen. Were you rushing? Were you dragging? Did things feel smooth? You've got to become aware of these things in order to improve upon them. All of the self-taught drumming greats out there like Ringo Starr and John Bonham and Chad Smith and Dave Grohl, all these guys, fantastic drummers who claim to really have never taken lessons. I guarantee you, they've done a lot of that. They've all done a lot of recording. That's how they got really good at what they do. They played with bands that were great, spent lots of time in the studio recording, and probably getting a lot of really good feedback from producers and from band members. If you're with a band recording in the studio, you're going to really learn how you sound and how to adjust your sound to really pull off what needs to be pulled off. And so you're going to learn a lot in that process. So it's safe to say that the self-taught drumming greats out there did plenty of self-analysis and plenty of watching themselves play and listening back especially to themselves play. And so you've got to do those things to actively critique, to make sure you're aware of your weaknesses and to make sure that you're growing. Speaking of famous self-taught drummers, so mistake number 3 is fearing that formal lessons, formal training will rob you of that creativity that you just inherently have. A lot of self-taught drummers are very creative, and that's awesome. That's great. And the great self-taught drummers I just mentioned, very creative, very musical players that just add so much to every song they play on. But I think that the belief that formal training will rob you of that free-spirited kind of creativity comes from the fact that there are so many drumming greats who are so musical, like Ringo, like Bonham, great drummers. And so I think sometimes we fear that we're going to get put into a box when we start taking lessons, and we're going to, the teacher is just going to like whip us into shape and like tell us we can't do this anymore, that we've got to do this, and we got to get rid of that, and we got to think this way. A good teacher is not going to make you do that. And if you do decide to take lessons, seek out a really good teacher, somebody you get along with and who shares your vision for what you want to learn. A good teacher is not going to be black and white. It's not going to be do this and don't do that. With some things, maybe so, but there's a lot of room for expansion and a lot of room for thinking outside the box on the drums. So a good teacher is going to help you work to your strengths. And if a teacher is helping you work to your strengths, then you're only going to become more and more creative as you learn. Remember that the musicality side of drumming, the listening side, that's the kind of thing that you're going to get very good at as a self-taught drummer because you're listening to records and you're playing songs. That's awesome. But it's the physical, technical side. That's what a teacher is really going to help you focus on most likely. My first drum set teacher really had me doing a lot of technical stuff, building my coordination. And then on the side, I was playing with a band and I was working on all the music stuff. So the music inspired the technical and the technical boosted the musical. And so my teacher pushing me to learn the coordination and to learn the hand technique and all these good things, that helped elevate my ability to be creative and to be musical. So a good teacher is not going to put you into any musical box and is not going to strip away your free-spirited creativity that is part of who you are as a drummer. Instead, they're going to reinforce that. And so if you've ever had a teacher that didn't do that for you, then either end that relationship, find somebody who you get along with, who shares your vision, or just learn here on this channel, because I hope that the things I'm throwing at you are things that are going to boost your musical creativity too, because it's all about the songs. It's all about the music ultimately. Mistake number 4. I like this one because it's kind of the touchy subject that is going to offend somebody. But if you're very self-aware and you're actively working to get better, you're going to be willing to admit that you've fallen into this. We've all been there. Mistake number 4 is assuming that high-quality gear will make up for your lack of skill, simply put. Assuming that buying better gear is going to make up for the fact that maybe your skills are just falling a little bit short. If you're willing to admit that you've been there, you're willing to admit that your skills are a little bit short and that you're trying to make up for that with nice gear, whether it's a really nice electric kit. Electric drum sets tend to make us sound better than we do. Or you're getting better cymbals and you're getting really nice drums, hoping that's going to help you sound better when really your hand technique isn't great, and so you're always going to feel stiff and your playing is going to feel frantic. The gear's not going to do much good for you, and so really you need to shift your mindset to spending more money on gaining knowledge and gaining skill rather than gaining gear. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir for a bunch of you guys. If you're a fan of this channel and you enjoy my style of teaching and you agree with my philosophies, then you get that. This is a non-glamorous drummer where we're about simple gear, not spending lots of money on gear, focusing on real skill instead. But I know there's somebody out there who's going to be offended. And so what you've got to understand is try not to take offense to it. I was there too, where I was trying to figure out I was obsessed with snare sound at one point, and like, how do I make the snare sound better? How do I find the perfect snare? And that's a dangerous road to go down because you're never going to find the perfect snare. I'll go and tell you that. But what I ended up learning was I've got to get better at tuning my snare for the sound that I want, and I've got to get better at hitting it for the sound that I want. If I want that big crack out of a snare, I've got to play rim shots, which means I've got to get better at playing the rim shots. I got to focus on me. I'm the problem, not the gear. I want a nice, smooth, washy ride sound. I've got to focus on being consistent in how I play that wash. The fact that it's inconsistent isn't because the cymbal isn't the best cymbal. Maybe it's not, but a better cymbal might not make this better. You've got to practice being consistent with how you do things. Your toms might sound bad because you're not hitting them in the center or you don't have them tuned well. Work with what you got. This is one of those things that I feel very strongly about because I've been there and I've seen so many people fall into this trap. And so don't fall into the trap of assuming better gear is going to make you sound better, because you as the drummer, you have the final say in what you sound like. You are the final word in how you sound, not your gear. Your gear plays a part in it, but the drummer plays a bigger part than the gear does. Okay, number 5. This is definitely a very big one. And when I'm going through my email inbox and just reading replies to emails I send out to my email list and looking at questions people ask me, something that I've sensed a lot of, whether or not people have directly asked this, it's the feeling that because you're getting old, because you're later on in life, maybe you're retired, or maybe you're just, I'll be coming up on 30 in a couple years, and now in that phase of life where I'm married, having kids. And once you get into that busy kind of adult kind of life, or you're getting older, you start to feel like time has maybe passed you by and you've kind of missed out on your opportunity to really get good at something. That's definitely a common mistake the self-taught drummers make, assuming that because they've never taken lessons, it's therefore too late because too much time has passed, their time's up, there's no hope. That's incredibly sad to hear, and I don't want you to fall into that. I have a one-on-one coaching student. He's 65, fantastic student. He's making progress. I have a lot of online course students who are like way older than I am, like my parents' age. And it's so cool teaching these people because they're at a time later in life where they actually have more time to learn. That's definitely a cool thing where you get to a point later on where you actually have more time. The stage of life I'm at right now, I'm busy with family stuff, taking care of a 1-year-old. And so my wife and I are pretty tied up with that. And so I don't have a ton of time to like practice the drums and do all this stuff. I did a lot of that in high school and in college, and I was thankful for that time. But just because you missed that, just because you didn't take lessons as a kid, does not mean that it's too late. And just because you've gotten old doesn't mean you can't learn. You can still learn. If you have an open mind and you're ready to sit down and take the time to fulfill that lifelong dream of learning the drums, you can totally do it. I promise you. Almost every one of my online students that I've had through this business, through this YouTube channel, have been people a lot older than me, like in their 50s, 60s. And I get emails from people all the time who are getting back into the drums and who are working at the stuff, and they're in their 70s and 80s. And it's so cool to hear, and it's so encouraging. And I hope that you know that. If you're one of my older subscribers, I hope that you understand that you are really not that much in the minority. There are a lot of you. There are also a lot of female drummers. It's always interesting to me that too. There's kind of the assumption that everybody who follows this channel, they're all like male drummers in their late 20s like me. But that's not true. If you're a female drummer, there's a lot of you guys too. There's a lot of ladies out there that sign up for my courses and that have even taken lessons. And it's so cool. And so no matter who you are, you can learn this stuff. You can master this stuff when you're ready to sit down and take the time to focus on it. Because that's what it comes down to. If you're motivated and you're willing to set aside the time, you're going to master this. You can conquer the drums. You can do this stuff. In a way, you have an advantage when you come to drums later on in life, and that is that you're better able to self-assess. You're more self-aware, and you're more mature. You've got some wisdom of the life that you've lived, and so it makes it easier to learn. When you're a kid, there are some kids that just grasp onto things quickly and just learn all this stuff quickly. There are always the child prodigies out there. They're very rare. But as a kid, sometimes you just learn stuff and you just do it by rote, but you don't really understand the why. But as you get older, things go full circle and you begin to understand the why, and you actually become more mature as a musician. But you can skip into that maturity more quickly when you come to drums later on in life, where you're already understanding what needs to happen. You're understanding all of the why. And so, yes, the technique might be a little slow at first, and you're working things that you haven't done yet in life. But when you're patient with it and you repetitively practice it every day, you can do it. And then you can take all that maturity from maybe decades of hearing music and decades of maybe even playing another instrument. That's what's really cool too. And then apply that to your drumming, and you have this mature, wise, well-rounded approach that's actually very productive, very successful, and always very cool to see. So, to wrap this up, like I said, I'm not trying to come down on you if you're self-taught. Many of us have been there. I was self-taught for a few years, and I ended up learning a lot in that phase of life. And I've still learned a lot about drumming and about music indirectly, not in one-on-one lessons, but going out and seeking the knowledge and the resources on my own. There's a lot to be learned that way. If you've fallen into any of these mistakes, I hope that today's video is helping turn you around and get you out of those. Know that it's never too late. It's never too late to learn the drums. I'm making sure I don't leave anything out here. I've got my notes right here. Never too late. You can master the drums no matter who you are, how old you are, where you're coming from, which walk of life you're in right now, which phase of life. You can do this. The resources are all right here. And by learning proper technique, by doing things the right way, even if that means taking lessons, if you're able to take local lessons, awesome. That's not going to take away from your creativity. That's not going to rob you of that natural feel and that natural approach that you want to have. A good teacher is going to help reinforce that by building your coordination and improving your technique for better ease at the kit. So, to go further with this, check out the playlists in the description below that go into the routes of hand technique, coordination, whichever area you feel is your next step that you need to focus on. And earlier I told you about the 3-part daily practice guide. It's the most extensive guide that I have, most popular, and it goes into a lot of coordination exercises that really help you build up fluidity and freedom on the kit. That's great. That might be the guide for you, but it's also possible if you're needing to focus on hand technique a little more, check out the Fast Fluid Hands guide. That could be the one for you, where we start with the basics of grip and building finger speed, finger control, eliminating the weak hand, and just making sure you're getting that free rebound that makes everything else easier. And so that might be where you need to start. So know that those bonus guides, those are free. You can go check out the past lessons to go more in depth with this. The resources are all right here. So with your internet connection and all of today's technology, you got no excuse. As a self-taught drummer, you've got everything you need right here. And so be willing to self-critique, self-evaluate, admit your weaknesses, admit the mistakes, and turn things around. Get to work. I believe in you. You can do this. I've seen student after student, so many self-taught drummers and people who just maybe haven't learned things the right way, completely turn things around and really make serious progress in their playing. And so when you know those core things to do, sky's the limit. As always, thanks everyone for watching. If you're a fellow non-glamorous drummer, if you're a subscriber, thanks for hanging out with me week after week, digging into this content. It's always exciting to see the results people get from this and hear how it's helping you. And if you're new, be sure to subscribe, join the club, be a fellow non-glamorous drummer. We're covering all of the core steps you can take that really elevate your playing and help you reach your dreams of becoming the drummer you are meant to be, nailing songs, playing well with a band. All really good stuff. Know that you can do this. Stay non-glamorous. I'll see you on the next lesson.